Hawke. Imagine if everything you knew about history's most famous maritime disaster was wrong. What if the Titanic never actually sank? What if the ship that went down on that freezing April night in 1912 was actually a different vessel entirely, a damaged, older ship disguised as the brand new Titanic as part of an elaborate insurance fraud scheme? This is the Titanic Switch Theory, and for over a century, it has captivated conspiracy theorists, maritime historians, and curious minds alike. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most audacious conspiracy theories ever conceived, examining the evidence on both sides, and uncovering the truth behind the legend. Intro. Subscribe to see the full investigation unfold. Segment 1. The story begins not with the Titanic, but with its older sister ship, the HMS Olympic. The Olympic was the first of three massive Olympic-class ocean liners built by the White Star Line. When it launched in 1911, it was the largest ship in the world. But disaster struck on September 20, 1911, during the Olympic's fifth voyage. The massive liner collided with the HMS Hawke, a Royal Navy warship, in the Solent near Southampton. The collision tore a massive gash in the Olympic's hull, flooding a watertight compartment and severely damaging the propeller. The Olympic limped back to port, and the subsequent inquiry found White Star Line at fault. This was catastrophic for the company. The repairs were not covered by insurance, costing the White Star Line a fortune. And here's where the conspiracy theory gets interesting. Proponents claim the Olympic was so badly damaged and the financial situation so dire that J.P. Morgan, the American financier who owned White Star Line's parent company, hatched a desperate plan. Segment 2. The plan, according to conspiracy theorist Robin Gardner in his 1998 book Titanic, The Ship That Never Sank, was brilliantly simple yet staggeringly audacious. The White Star Line would secretly swap the damaged Olympic with its brand new, nearly identical sister ship, the Titanic. The Olympic would be disguised as the Titanic, cosmetically altered with the Titanic's name, interior fittings, and identifying marks. Then, during the maiden voyage, the disguised Olympic would be deliberately scuttled in a controlled manner, allowing the White Star Line to collect the insurance money. The real Titanic would quietly continue service under the Olympic's name. Proponents point to several pieces of evidence. Photographs from before the voyage seem to show differences in porthole arrangements between the ship that sailed and the ship built at Harland and Wolff. They note that J.P. Morgan himself cancelled his ticket on the Titanic at the last minute, supposedly knowing something would happen. And they point to the fact that the Titanic's maiden voyage was heavily publicized and promoted, yet the public was never allowed to inspect the ship before departure. But this is where things get complicated. Segment 3. Subscribe to stay with us as we uncover more. Segment 4. Let's examine the evidence that completely dismantles the switch theory. First, the insurance argument simply doesn't hold water. The Titanic cost $7.5 million to build but was insured for only $5 million. Historian Mark Chirnside notes that if this were a planned insurance fraud, White Star would have insured the ship for its full value. Instead, they stood to recoup only 2/3 of their investment. Maritime historian Chris Frame puts it bluntly, it is far more profitable to run a ship for decades than to sink it for a one-time payment. Sinking the Olympic for an insurance claim would have been a terrible business decision. Second, the physical evidence from the wreck site is irrefutable. The Titanic's wreckage has been recovered and examined, and it bears construction identification number 401. The Olympic's parts all bear number 400. These numbers were stamped into thousands of individual components during construction. You would have to replace every single part of the ship to hide the switch. Third, there are dozens of documented differences between the two ships. The Titanic had a unique cafe and enlarged a la carte restaurant based on lessons learned from the Olympic service. The Olympic had additional steel plates fitted in its engine room after repairs following the Hawke collision. These plates were still present during later inspections. The Titanic did not have them. Segment 5. Historians like Gareth Russell have called the theory so painfully ridiculous that he laments the thousands of trees sacrificed for the paper it was printed on. A switch would not have been economically worthwhile, since the owners could have simply damaged the ship while docked and collected the insurance from that accident. Instead, the theory asks us to believe they sailed thousands of innocent people into the middle of the Atlantic and rammed the ship into an iceberg. The logistics alone make it nearly impossible. The two ships were at different stages of construction, with different interior layouts, different passenger accommodations, and thousands of tiny identifying details. To pass off a one-year-old ship for a brand new one would require hiding every single one of those differences. And then there's the question of motive. J.P. Morgan's International Mercantile Marine went bankrupt just 2 years after the Titanic sank. Far from being a successful scheme, the disaster was one of Morgan's rare financial failures. OUTRO. So why does the Titanic Switch Theory persist? Because it offers a compelling narrative. It transforms a tragic accident into a calculated scheme, a random disaster into a deliberate act. It gives us villains and heroes, secret plots and hidden truths. But the reality is that the Titanic sank because of a combination of factors: an unusually cold year pushing icebergs further south, a ship traveling too fast through dangerous waters, insufficient lifeboats, and a design that prioritized luxury over safety. These are the real lessons of the Titanic. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating mysteries. What conspiracy theory should we investigate next? Let us know in the comments below.